All right, welcome back. You're still watching on Look Up Business. So let's talk about it then, the opportunities in the energy sector. Let's understand where we are as a country in as much as the energy mix is concerned. Now, we've been talking so much about KPLC. Just before I introduce the guest then who's joining us in the studio this morning, let's just give you an overview of exactly where we are in as much as the biggest announcements from the governments are. Number one, we had said that by 2022, by the way, this is just what the outgoing government wanted to achieve. They wanted that rural electrification would be already at 100%. Question is, are we there yet? When we're looking at the economy, fuel is the dominant, taking about 70% of our energy requirements in the country. And also that by 2040, that Kenya as an economy is one of those few countries that wanted to fully develop geothermal energy by 2040. Currently, it accounts for 50% of Kenya's power generation. That by 2022, we were supposed to be producing 100,000 barrels of oil. That is exactly a bone of contention as well. And now we look at where 2/3 of our energy currently comes from. It comes from bioenergy. So the question then becoming, where are we as a country in as regards the energy mix? Because that's a very important question. And as an investor who's looking at this new government coming in, you're asking yourself the question, where do I put my money? Joining us in this conversation is George Aluru, who is the chairperson, Electricity Sector Association of Kenya. George, how are you doing, sir?
Very well, Simba. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Let's begin from there. An overview of the Electricity Association of Kenya. Can we know exactly who you are, what you do, in as much as the energy sector in the country is concerned?
So the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya is an association of power producers. We are all private, so private power producers, private people invested in transmission and distribution, and also private people who are investing in what we call commercial and industrial installations. And these are your solar plants that you find on top of shopping malls and industries. And then there are also a few other guys who also do mini hydro close to tea farms and things like that.
Yes.
So for us, our goal is really to work with all the stakeholders within the electricity sector to transform it and improve it from the point of view of it being well-governed, efficient in the way it operates, and basically just ensuring that everything goes right within this sector.
Yes.
This is what we as an association work towards achieving.
Pretty much. So somebody looking at you would say then you are also overlooking just how the energy sector in the country is run. From where you're sitting, George, would you say that you are confident of the direction? And I would ask you about the outgoing government, about the outgoing government in terms of how they were running this sector.
No, I think the outgoing government really tried to do its part. They tried what they could to really manage the situation the way they found it, and they were trying to move in a certain direction.
Yes.
And we, I think, saw a lot of subsidies come into it, whether it's in petroleum. I think you're also mentioning around unga, and to an extent also on electricity. Yeah, but as we have all noted in the country, subsidies don't work because you tend to take money from one pocket and put it in the other pocket. So it's just more taxes that would still be paying for the same subsidies. So now with the incoming government, we've started seeing signs that they're fairly young. I mean, it's only 1 week.
Yes.
Yeah, but we've already seen signs towards removing subsidies, allowing KPLC itself to run commercially. I think if you had looked at the Kenya Kwanza manifesto, you would notice that they actually did mention that they would work towards having a commercially run KPLC. And I think that's part of what you are seeing in the stock market, that now there's this confidence that KPLC will probably have the disposition to run commercially. We've seen some major politicians buying some serious shares, and of course that's also moving the market. But the real thing is that if we allow KPLC to get enough revenue to pay all its obligations and also run from a commercial standpoint, then the entire sector actually becomes strengthened, because KPLC is at the core of the sector.
Yes.
It's the single buyer. They are the ones who sell to everyone in this country at the moment. And really, the health of this institution is very important for the health of the entire electricity sector.
Yes, pretty much. So let's delve a little bit then. And I want you to give us an overview of where we are as a country when it comes to the energy mix in this particular sector. You heard me talk about what the country wanted to achieve by 2022.
Yes.
We have exactly also what we want to achieve by 2040. Where are we when it comes to the energy mix in the country?
I think first we start off with your statement that, you know, about 70% of the energy we use in this country is actually biofuels.
Yes.
So it's firewood, it's makaa, charcoal.
Yes.
That's where most of our energy actually comes from. And we use this for cooking, for heating, those kind of applications. But if we then look at the remaining 30%, I think about 20% of that is electricity. Sorry, 15%. Around 15% is electricity. The rest is petroleum. Again, petroleum used for fuel, mostly in cars and firing industries. But if we then come into electricity itself, you find today we have a very nice and diversified mix. We have, I think, something like 33% geothermal, same hydro in terms of installed capacity. This is what the capacity that is installed and could be available for us to use. Then we of course still have thermal plants, and we have a huge installation of wind, decent 15%. And some solar, with more solar actually coming on board soon. But then there's a difference between capacity, which is installed, and what we actually use. So yes, in terms of what we actually use, we use something like 50% geothermal, which means the number or the percentage of time or the percentage of energy that actually gets run into our system, regardless of how much capacity is installed, we use more geothermal. And as of today, we have installed something like 71% renewable energy, but we actually consume about 95% renewable energy within our Kenyan grid. So the other plants are more or less also just supporting these renewable energy technologies that we've installed. And if you look across the world, that's probably some of the highest penetration of renewable energy across the world for an economy the size of Kenya.
Yes. Yeah. So when you speak about just how especially when it comes to electricity in the country is consumed, there has been also another conversation on the fact that in this country, the stress on the consumption, that's where exactly where we're missing. So let me ask you now, as a player in this particular sector, how do you help improve consumption? Because there's also that particular area where the cost then of dropping this energy to this particular homes that need it, that's where the problem begins. You've seen exactly what the outgoing government was trying to do, rural electrification program. They thought it was beautiful, but then at the end of the day, they look back and they say, maybe not.
No, I think it's a kind of conundrum, because you understand where the government comes from is from a social point of view.
Yes.
They need to serve everyone. But then sometimes some of these interventions are not very commercial in nature. So they might not be very sustainable. And this is what you're referring to, because we have done quite some grid extension. We have done quite some last mile.
Yes.
I think as you were mentioning, the target is by 2026, we have 100% access to every home. That's what the outgoing government has as a target. And I guess it's something that will be carried forward. But then now, how do we ensure that once you have that power, you're actually using it for some commercially viable activity? Because generally, domestic customers do not use power in the volumes and in the patterns that you want.
Yes.
For sure, Simba, I know today you walked out of your house, you switched off everything.
Yeah, everything was off.
Everything, you switch it off, and then you come back at night and you turn it back on.
Couple of hours.
So what that causes to the grid is a very serious disturbance, because when you need this power to be used, you're supplying power all over many kilometers, and then the demand is just too low. Then it means you lose a lot of power on the network itself, and then your connection is not economically viable.
Yes.
I mean, Kenya Power makes a lot of losses in giving you that power, to put it bluntly. Yeah, so the idea is that we must find a way of creating productive uses within those villages. Like things like electrifying your boreholes, electrifying your posho mills, those kind of things that actually drive demand. And then also, of course, encouraging industry to more or less be devolved, industry to move into the counties, to move where you have those connections. Because when you have an industry in a place, then it really acts as an anchor load. So it kind of ensures that the supply that is going there is economically viable. And,
yes.
and then from that kind of basis, KPLC then is able to commercially kind of supply you, because they kind of cross-subsidize you with the ability of this big consumer to consume in huge numbers.
Yes.
And it makes even the cost of maintaining that connection viable for them. So that's one of the things that we really need to work on. But of course, even at the bigger level, the macro level, there are many things we still need to do, like finishing all the transmission line connections that we need in this country. There's been a line from Narok, Bomet, going down to Migori. I think it has been stuck maybe 8-10 years, something like that. So the sum effect of that is that we have power sitting in Olkaria, in Naivasha area, but then you have blackouts in Western Kenya, or brownouts, or poor quality supply, simply because the transmission link is insufficient. So yes, KETRACO, I've seen KETRACO has actually put this out again to tender, and they're really working towards completing it. So the idea is that if we can ensure that all these areas where we have a poor quality of supply, we send in transmission lines, you have load, but you don't have the right quality of supply. Yeah. So that also first helps us to grow demand organically. That's just a natural growth that will happen, because now you don't rely on your generator as much. You have better quality power from the grid. That would be a real, I think the investment in transmission and not just in generation would really be a big boost to demand in this country. Then of course we have the now modern trends, things like e-vehicles. So whether it's your e-boda, your e-ndudis, or your e-vehicles, cars. So those would also be a huge demand driver. And of course, now if you plug it into the conversation of also petroleum, then you understand that if we were to put in the right kind of tax incentives that would allow us to, most of us Kenyans would import a used car from Japan. If you can reliably at a lower cost import electric cars from Japan, and maybe have a way of figuring out also the cost of the battery, because the battery would be the issue. Yes. Then we can create a whole new demand and actually help us also to reduce our reliance on petroleum. So these are things that I think as industry we have been talking about. We will continue to talk about it. It's a real opportunity for us. We do not produce enough petroleum. I think as you've tried to mention, we do not produce petroleum, so we are a net consumer of petroleum. So anything that starves us from petroleum really helps. And saving that forex, so it's USDs that we are paying for this petroleum outside, would really help us to take that money and invest it in other things in Kenya. And then lastly, I would also want to mention around green hydrogen. So there's a whole movement around greening the way we use hydrogen. Hydrogen itself, it's an energy carrier, and it can have very many applications. You can actually burn hydrogen itself to create heat and use it for cooking and whatever else. You can use hydrogen as a raw material for fertilizers, for e-fuels. And again, if you come back to that nexus of energy and agriculture, if we were to invest, and this is more or less, today is more at an early stage kind of research level. If we can prove some pilots that we can produce, you can use our renewable energy to produce hydrogen and then jump from hydrogen to fertilizer or to fuels, then we would be again killing two birds with one stone. Yes. Because we now have this huge potential in renewable energy, but we do not really have the huge demand that would justify us actually investing in building out these renewable energy power plants. So things like hydrogen and the way it relates to fertilizer that we all use in agriculture can really help drive demand higher.
Pretty much. George, I hear you speak about opportunities, but let me just take you a couple months back in the outgoing government, since now we do have a new government in place. when it comes to finding solutions to the energy sector in the country, you have to also include in private players.
Exactly,
And on the perspective of how you treat private players in the country, let's go to solar energy. I do know some of your members are really concerned that right now in this country, all of a sudden, you have to go get expensive licenses if you want to be a player in the solar energy in the country. Another area as well, when it comes to independent power producers in this country, even some of them who've been supplying to Kenya Power, right now, they're almost getting pushed out of business just because the government wants to control this particular sector in the country. Talk to me, George. What stands as an opportunity then in this particular sector, going by how closely it's guarded, if I may say that, by the government? And as an independent player, where do I begin from if I want to make steps in this sector?
No, I think that assertion is quite right. I think as independent power producers, we have faced the butt of the outgoing government.
Yes.
And to be honest, also public opinion, with the thought that we as independent power producers are kind of fleecing the consumer by charging high electricity prices. I mean, what has come to the fore, I think after that 15% reduction that was announced in January, we saw that really just the independent power producers or the cost of electricity itself is not the only thing that affects, let's say, manufacturing, because this was mostly targeted at manufacturing and kind of subsidizing domestic consumers.
Yes.
So now there's a realization that maybe we didn't move in the right direction. Of course, there's a new government. We are hoping for dialogue. We're hoping for a lot more dialogue and conversations, because in the end, as independent power producers, we exist in this market because they are consumers. And our interests are really to have more consumers so that we can actually sell the power that we produce.
Yes.
So there is a room under what we call the feed-in tariff process, where you, as a private investor, you can come into this country and identify an opportunity, let's say in solar or wind or hydro, and then you do just go through the licensing. There's a whole licensing process gazetted, and it starts off at the Ministry of Energy, where you do an expression of interest. Then you do your feasibility studies and take all the licenses through NEMA, through EPRAN, and all these agencies, and then you can actually get to build out your power plant. But then there's also, we have been talking as an industry about now transitioning, because a feed-in tariff actually gives you a guaranteed tariff for a certain period of time that secures your financials. It secures your ability to pay your loans. It secures your financial viability as a project itself. But then today's trend in the world is actually more auctions. And an auction is where now you compete. There's no set tariff, but you as the producers, you come, the government says we need, let's say, 100 megawatt in wind, in solar, in whatever technology that they want. And then private players would come and compete, and you find a price, the most cost-efficient price through this tender process. Yes. And this is now where the country is shifting towards. So for new people coming into the market to invest in renewable energy, I think the lookout is to when, you should really look up to when this auction process will kickstart in Kenya. Because today, all the plants that you're seeing being built today, the solars, the winds, they have been mostly through this old feed-in tariff process, which is good when a market is young, when you haven't attracted enough interest in people investing in the power sector. So, and then it gets to a point where now you have this huge interest, and you now start focusing on cost and other efficiencies. Because within an auction, you can probably say, cost is one of the parameters, maybe location, maybe youth empowerment, maybe something else. And then you now get a bit more selective, and it has been proven all over the world that then this also leads to lower prices. And I think with that, I also come back to the issue of prices. Of course, prices are based on contracts. So there's contracts that the independent power producers, KenGen itself, signs with KPLC, that guarantees them a certain level of income that allows them to actually make their business viable.
Yes.
So whenever these contracts, someone tries to step into them and change them, then it really sends a very bad signal to the market that, you know, you're not guaranteed that if you come and invest for the 20 years that you have this contract, you'll earn whatever income that you have. So now the thinking has to be around how can we all band together and see what can be done short term. Let's look at our taxes. Let's look at the levies and how we can improve that. And then what can be done in 3 years' time, in the medium term. And now that's where things like auctions come in, because you now have this tender process and have people come bid. Once you even after you win the bid, it doesn't mean that tomorrow you'll be building. You still need to do a lot of things. You need to, you know, deal with Kenyans and their land issues. You need to go to NEMA. You need to get all these sorts of licenses. And maybe you only get to build after 3 years. That's why I'm saying some solutions, we will get lower prices of power from power producers, both Kenyan and independent power producers. But it's not a quick fix. It is something that will be medium term and towards the long term.
Yeah. But George, when I look at an opportunity, especially in a sector, there's a question that really comes up, especially when we're talking about the energy sector in the country. Question is this: who is driving the investments in the energy sector, which will then the direction of investments? Is it the government or it is the investors in this particular sector? Because if you look at other countries, I mean, it is the manufacturers of electric vehicles who will say, then we have these solutions, we need the government to come in and support them so that then we can get to achieve this particular quota. In Kenya, it looks as if we're still waiting for the government to make these decisions before then investors can move in that direction. Is that the biggest undoing for us?
Not really. I would say investors actually drive the market, but of course investors do not set the rules of the game. This is where now you hear us saying government. It's because really that facilitative environment has to be there for an investor to put in more. Like today in Kenya, we have, I think, more than 100 private investors willing to put in money in electricity, but then we need to see that there are policies that grow demand, which means that I am sure that my $100 million, if I put it in, then there will be demand for that power. KPLC will pay me in short. So that's really where it is at. It's not that we are waiting on the government to move. Private sector is already on the ground. Money is ready to be deployed in Kenya. But these opportunities have to make financial sense, because, you know, capital is not loyal. Capital will move to whichever other industry that will give it the returns that it wants. And therefore, we must make electricity as attractive as possible for capital. And that means you work on your taxes, work on the red tape in terms of reducing the time it takes for a project to go from inception to construction. For example, I think Lake Turkana, the wind project in the north of Kenya, it took them 8-9 years from the day they thought about the idea to the day that they could start constructing. And a lot of that is just unnecessary. I mean, if we can, let's say, cut that to 3 years, then capital will realize that, okay, if I put my money in Kenya in the power sector, in 3 years, I'll be building and I'll start earning. But if you come in with that mind that you'll be earning in 3 years, and then you have all these delays and a change in government, a change in regulation, an attempt to renegotiate, then you get delayed from 3 to 10 years, and you lose hope. You basically move with your money to Uganda, whichever, or even to the border business.
Pretty much. Just in 2 minutes, if you may, because that's the only time that we got left on this. Well, we're now looking at a new government that's coming into office, George. If indeed you are to talk to them, talk to me from an inside-out approach. When you're looking at the energy sector in the country, where would they begin from? What is the thing that they have to do for us to start realizing these goals that were set for 2030? Because 2030 is not very far away from where we are.
I think it's two things, one of which they're already doing, and that is focusing on the viability of KPLC. Today, unfortunately for us, we only have one off-taker. So they really need to make sure that KPLC is as efficient as possible. We are not losing power in the transmission lines. We are collecting revenue. Revenue is being collected, and the tariff itself is reflective of the cost. So the tariff has to be able to pay for the cost of KPLC buying that power.
Yes.
It has to be able to attract me to come and put money in power, and also it has to be sensible for the consumer. So there's some work to be done in terms of getting KPLC to run commercially and a tariff that is viable. And the second thing is more around just discussing and approaching problems from a point of view where you actually listen. So you sit down, and there are many experts in this country, and people really have goodwill for the country, and all of us really want to see better economic development in Kenya. So the ask to the new government would be just to have that listening approach, to be able to help us together really solve this problem that we have in the country.
That is it.
Yeah. Thank you.
George, I mean, we've just scratched the surface. This can be it.
Yeah.
Guess what? I'll be calling you back again. There's so much, especially when we're talking about the energy sector in the country. By the way, even the steps that we're making towards fully electrifying our roads, because you can see how other states are doing it. So the question is, why are we not doing it ourselves? And are we going to be late to the mix? Because some countries are saying by 2030, our cars on the road will all be electric. So which cars are we going to drive? Anyway, so much really. And that is exactly what we have for you when it comes to the energy sector conversation. Just looking at our mix and exactly what the new government then can do to start fixing it, if indeed they're going to. And as you can hear from George, there's so much they have to do, but they've already started scratching the surface. Guess what? I do promise I'm going to call him back again, because the energy sector conversation's huge. My name is Simba, Elijah Charles Kiage. This is Look Up Business. I'll see you tomorrow.